I want to welcome everyone to the Senate Budget Committee today. I particularly want to welcome our two distinguished witnesses today, Erskine Bowles and Senator Alan Simpson, the co-chairs of the President's National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. Our hearing today will focus on the Commission's plan and how it would address the nation's long-term debt crisis. I want to begin by thanking Erskine and Alan for the really outstanding job they did leading the Fiscal Commission. We never would have accomplished as much if it had not been for their extraordinarily gifted and determined efforts. They made a significant personal sacrifice to come back to Washington to lead this commission, and we owe them deep gratitude. And I believe when the history of this period is written, their names will ring out as being leaders at getting the country back on track. I also want to thank them for starting the Moment of Truth project, which they're launching today to continue pushing for a bipartisan solution to the debt threat that we confront. The Fiscal Commission succeeded in putting this issue in the national spotlight. There is now a growing consensus on the need to act, and the Commission provided a bipartisan roadmap for moving forward. I believe we need to seize this opportunity. I believe we need to act this year, and that's why I've been part of a bipartisan group of senators who are trying to turn the essence of the Fiscal Commission's plan into legislation. If we can reach some kind of bipartisan agreement in the Senate, we hope it will provide more momentum to move toward a broad agreement this year. Here's what Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said about the debt threat. Our national debt is our biggest national security threat. That's coming from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Make no mistake, we are at a critical juncture. We are borrowing about 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. Spending as a share of our national income is the highest it has been in 60 years. The revenue as a share of our national income is the lowest it has been in 60 years. No wonder we have record deficits. If we look at the gross debt as a share of the economy, we see that it will reach 100% this year, well above the 90% threshold that many economists regard as the danger zone. Two of our nation's leading economists, Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff, studied the impact of debt on economies. They looked over a 200-year span at 44 countries, and this is their conclusion. We examined the experience of 44 countries spanning up to 2 centuries of data on central government debt, inflation, and growth. Our main finding is that across both advanced countries and emerging markets, high debt to GDP levels, above 90% gross debt to GDP, those levels are associated with notably lower growth outcomes. So if people wonder what this is about our economic future. This is about opportunity. This is about jobs. This is about the economic strength of the nation. This is not just numbers on a page. This is not just about bar charts showing deficits and debt. This is about the economic future of America. And the conclusion of the Reinhart-Rogoff study is that when you get a gross debt above 90% of GDP, your future economic prospects are compromised, are reduced, and reduced substantially. That's why this matters. I believe the only way we're going to solve the nation's long-term fiscal imbalance is by enacting a comprehensive debt reduction plan. We need a plan in the size and scope of what was proposed by the President's Fiscal Commission. The proposal would reduce the debt by $4 trillion over the next decade. It would put us on a course to get the debt stabilized and then brought down as a share of GDP so that we would be in a position to handle future shocks that none of us can anticipate. I believe a plan like the Commission plan must include spending cuts, entitlement changes, and fundamental tax reform that simplifies the tax code, lowers rates, and raises more revenue. The Commission plan provided such a balanced approach. Its savings come roughly equally from non-defense discretionary, defense discretionary, mandatory spending, and revenue. It's worth emphasizing that savings from Social Security reforms in the Commission plan are used only, and I emphasize only, to extend the program's solvency, not for deficit reduction. If there is one message I'd like to get out there as clearly as I can, the savings in Social Security were redirected to Social Security to extend its solvency, not for deficit reduction. This chart highlights the key elements of the tax reform included in the plan. The plan eliminates or scales back tax expenditures and lowers tax rates. And by the way, tax expenditures are now running over $1.1 trillion a year. Tax expenditures are as big as all of domestic discretionary spending. And it makes the tax code more progressive. It promotes economic growth and improves America's global competitiveness. You know, if we're going to reform the tax code, one thing we've got to have in mind is the competitive position of the United States. We are no longer so dominant that we don't have to worry about the effect of our tax code on the competitive position of the United States. Notably, the Commission's report included an illustrative tax reform plan that demonstrates how eliminating or scaling back tax expenditures can actually lower rates and produce more revenue. Instead of 6 tax brackets for individuals, the plan included just 3 brackets of 12%, 22%, and 28%. The corporate rate would be reduced from 35% to 28%. Capital gains and dividends would be taxed as ordinary income. The mortgage interest and charitable deductions would be reformed, better targeting their benefits. The child tax credit and earned income tax credit would be retained to help working families, and the alternative minimum tax would be repealed. The Commission's plan also increases revenue to 21% of GDP by 2022, and over time actually balances the budget. That's the kind of tax reform we'll need to adopt. That, along with the spending reductions and the entitlement reforms, are what is required to actually succeed. Let me just conclude by showing the different paths forward of the various plans. You can see the course that we're on is going to take us to a debt to GDP, and this is publicly held debt now, not gross debt, publicly held debt, 233% of GDP on the current course, much higher than that if we look at gross debt. The Ryan Roadmap takes us to a place I don't think we want to go, because that's over 90% publicly held debt. On a gross debt basis, that'd be well over 120% of GDP. The plan by the Commission takes us to publicly held debt of 30% of GDP. As a gross debt, that would be about 60% of GDP. That is, to me, a responsible target. To get down to 60% of GDP on the gross debt would allow us to handle any future shocks that we might experience as a nation. So that's why we went a little further than just stabilizing the debt. We actually brought it down markedly as a share of the economy so that we could handle future shock.